You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game. And we will be doing lots of politics and public policy this evening because we have as our guest Walter Jacobson, who everybody would know, who was like Mr. News at CBS 2 News for oh so long, at least the 70s and the 80s. And into the 90s, you went to Fox, is that right?
I was at Fox, too. I've been to, Jeff, most of the stations in one capacity or another over all these years.
Okay, so your focus has always been on Chicago and Illinois and so forth, right? Not so much national, although you covered some of that.
Well, my focus kind of spreads and runs the gamut, but I think mostly on local events. That's where I've spent most of my time.
Yeah, and when you came out of college, well, you went to graduate school at Columbia School of Journalism.
I did.
Then you moseyed over to start working full-time at various places, right?
Well, when I was in college, I worked my first summer jobs as a leg man for the columnist Jack Mabley in the Chicago Daily News, and I worked for City News Bureau, and I worked for United Press International. And then when I really got into the business, I was a reporter, a county building reporter for Chicago's American, which you may recall was the afternoon paper owned by the Chicago Tribune. My assignment was the county building. I was there. Royko was getting started at the time, and he was there too. Mike Royko, you certainly know about him. From there, for some strange reason that I can't really still, even at this age, explain, I left the news print business to try television.
You went to Channel 2 in the 70s, right?
I was at Channel 2 to begin with in 1963.
1963.
Right.
So that happens to be...
a writer, and a assistant producer for a news broadcast.
So what do you remember? Where were you when Kennedy was assassinated?
I was in the newsroom. No, that's not true. I was at the Chicago Press Club on Erie Street, it was at the time, having lunch. And with, of course, a lot of reporters and PR people who were at that time active with each other. And suddenly, on one of the television monitors, Walter Cronkite appeared. This was at about noon. And at that point, of course, everybody who was eating slowed down, put their silverware down, watched the monitor to see why Walter Cronkite would be coming on in the afternoon. And when he announced that President Kennedy had been shot en masse, we all got up and ran to our respective newsrooms. Mine was about 3 blocks away at CBS. And when I got there, I was told that my assignment would be to go to the Chicago Theater on State Street and Lake, you know, and catch people who had been in the theater watching a movie for 3 hours and confront them with the news that President Kennedy had been shot and was dead. And they had been in the theater for several hours, so they had no idea what was going on. And to be confronted like that with a microphone saying, Kennedy's been shot, what do you think, was really, now that I look back on it, and have looked back on it many times over the years, a very bad thing to do. I'm sorry I did it.
But do you remember what people said on some of them? Any of the comments you remember?
Most of them started to cry just like that. Most of them didn't, and others of them just didn't believe what I was saying.
Isn't that what your news manager watched? He wanted somebody crying. You had good theater, right?
Good theater.
At the Chicago Theater.
Right. I was told, Jeff, to catch people unawares and get their action. And I was told, Walter, get tears. Get people crying. And, you know, that wasn't very hard to do, but I wasn't going to find some special way to do that. But I asked the questions, and because I was young and ambitious and wanted to move ahead in the business, I took the assignment. Not that I could.
Well, is that what TV does best? Blood, sweat, and tears. Actually, skip the sweat. It's blood and tears. They said at Channel 2, about Channel 2, maybe 5 and 7, if it bleeds, it leads.
It bleeds, it leads.
Is that still the case?
I think that is, but I'm not there, so I can't tell you for sure because I don't see the competitiveness between the various stories that are on the playlist at that time. But yes, that's true in our business in general.
Is that wrong?
As well as television.
Is that wrong?
I think it's, I can't say it's wrong because it's what gets people interested, but whether it's good or fair or nice or part of our community responsibility, yes, I could say I don't like that. Okay.
Let's go right to the current.
Okay.
The big news
Okay.
on January 12th, 2015, what would that be, Walter?
That the big news on that day. Well, if Rahm Emanuel doesn't do something that grabs all of our attention, the big news will be, and it should be, the inauguration of Bruce Rauner as the first Republican in this state for over 12 years.
Okay, and let's just say you're not doing your perspective either at Channel 2 or Fox, but let's say you were. Let's say Fox decided they're bringing you back for a little bit, just like Channel 2 brought you back, you and Bill. But okay, I'm just saying for tomorrow, assume you're doing the Fox 9 o'clock news, okay, and they want to know from you, your perspective. Take a guess. What would you be talking about in that inauguration of Governor Rauner?
I'm doing my perspective now, as you've mentioned, on WGN Radio 720, and I would do what I would do doing what I'm doing now, which is, of course, talk about Bruce Rauner.
What do you think of Bruce Rauner?
Well, I think Bruce Rauner is potentially a very good, strong governor, potentially. But I think his campaign to, as he said, quote, uproot the corruption and shake up Springfield is more of a game than a reality. Bruce Rauner has already made some very definite strides toward the old times. Look, he appointed the new comptroller to take Judy Bartopinka's place. Her name is Leslie Munger. She's a political appointment. She may be qualified. I'm not saying
she ran for state rep and lost.
Yeah, she lost, but
So
but more importantly, she was, and her husband, and she had contributed to Rauner's campaign, and Rauner contributed.
She was a friend of Ron Gidwitz, who was very close with Bruce Rauner, and you're saying that closeness to Ron Gidwitz. Is that what you mean?
Jeff,
when you say
no.
Political, what do you mean?
Well, I mean that her path to where she got is political rather than governmental. She had no experience in government. She was in charge of the hair business for Helene Curtis, and successful. And Ron Gidwitz was closely tied to her. She worked for him. Right. He had a lot of faith in her. He is very close to Bruce Rauner.
There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with not having experience directly in government. No. She ran for state rep. She got prepared. People challenged her. Are you saying she's not qualified? Look, what does a comptroller do?
I want to make it very clear that she may be very well qualified. Nobody knows specifically what the comptroller does other than pay the bills.
Yeah.
But you know what?
I can write checks, you can write checks, so can she.
Of course, but there are
what's the problem?
Oh, well, there are a lot of, and I don't want to make this a problem with Leslie Munger herself, because she is qualified, at least in economic terms. The point I'm trying to make is that Bruce Rauner, who spent a whole campaign talking about the old way Springfield operates and the corruption and the patronage. When he gets in office, the first big appointment he makes is for a woman who was involved more with business than with government. Her connections.
Walter, I have to disagree with you.
Connections, Jeff. You're putting me in a position of having to put down Leslie Munger, and I don't want to do that.
But you're the one who said Rauner did something wrong when he did a political, and I'm saying there's nothing wrong with taking account of the politics.
I didn't say wrong. I said Rauner does what he complained about everybody else doing, which was appoint people with political connections. Look at James Meeks. His new appointment as head of the Illinois Board of Education.
Great appointment, isn't it? A fantastic appointment.
We don't know that.
Oh, no, we do know that.
James
do you know
Meeks
something about James Meeks?
I know that he's a good
Tell the viewers about him.
You're going to ask me or tell me?
No, we have to break it up a little bit, because people may notice. We're sharing a mic because I had to do an audible and do the best I can with a non-functioning mic.
There's another one.
So I'll say, give me a little time to get the mic to you before you start talking.
Okay.
Give me a break.
Okay.
I'm not Walter Jacobson.
Okay.
All right.
Ready?
All I wanted to say to you, and then you can respond.
Right.
Okay. Look, Bruce Rauner ran against Springfield, but the corruption of Springfield, I don't think he ever said people who were in politics or new people in politics can't be qualified. Most of his professional career, all of it before becoming governor, was in the private sector, and yet he thinks he's qualified.
Right.
Leslie Munger, he thinks, is qualified because he thinks she's smart,
Right.
she's capable,
Right.
and she's honest. His problem with politicians that he railed against Springfield, he says it was the corruption. There's nothing wrong, I would think he would say to you, and then I'll get you your turn. There's nothing wrong with taking account of politics as you make appointments, as long as you appoint people who are qualified and as long as you don't do things for corrupt motives.
Well, maybe you read him, Jeff, differently than I did. I read Bruce Rauner's remarks to shake up Springfield to include patronage and appointments other than people who are in government and politics. Politics especially. Now look at James Meeks Reverend Meeks may be the best director, chairman of the Illinois Board of Education in the history of the state. But James Meeks is the one who did, in large measure, help Bruce Rauner win this election. And Bruce Rauner is thanking James Meeks by giving him a job, a very important job.
No, I
Maybe
don't-
he'll do it wonderfully. And I think Bruce Rauner would argue that he might do it wonderfully. But when Bruce Rauner said we've got to take patronage out of Springfield, then he should have taken patronage out of
I
Springfield. There are
disagree.
other people who are just as qualified as James Meeks.
Well, Walter,
Yes.
I disagree because I don't think of James Meeks as a patronage position. If Mr. Rauner were to appoint a person who was, one, not qualified, two, was like a buddy of his or a buddy of somebody else's and had worked hard to get him elected and hadn't done anything else related to education, I think you would have a point. But you may not know this, so let me tell you and see if knowing this, if you might alter your impression. James Meeks, as you do know, was a state senator.
Correct.
He was head, I believe, of one of the education committees when he was a state senator, so he's dealt with education. Number three, he has supported for a long time the idea that the quality of education in the inner city area is terrible and needs to be improved.
Correct.
Number four, you may not know this, but I was at the House of Hope, which is his church, the Salem Baptist Church. Reverend Meeks preaches there, I think, virtually every Sunday. I was there a few weeks ago, and so was Governor Rauner, which is why I was there, to watch as a media member. And I heard Reverend Meeks say to his good buddy, if you want to call it that, Governor Rauner, who said some nice things about it. He said, I just want to remind you, Governor Rauner, or Governor-elect Rauner, that when Rod Blagojevich came in and was governor, he said, I stood by Governor Blagojevich. And when Governor Blagojevich didn't do what he said he was going to do about improving the quality of education, I walked away from that guy. And he said when Quinn was there first as governor, I stood by Governor Pat Quinn. And when Governor Pat Quinn didn't do what he was going to do about improving the quality of education, I walked away from Pat Quinn and supported you, Governor-elect Rauner. I just want you to know, in the next 4 years, if you don't do what you said you were going to do about improving the quality of education in the inner city, I'll walk away from you. Now, if you heard that, I don't think that's a patronage appointment. He didn't want the job. He wanted to see that education is improved. And as you may know, and I'm sorry for making this long, so I'm going to give you time,
Okay.
but it's important. I think it's the most important thing we can be talking about. James Meeks has been identified now for a number of years with school choice,
Right.
with the idea that kids in failing schools should have the same choice that Barack and Michelle Obama had. They didn't send their kids to a public school, and God forbid, even though there was a very good one called the Kenwood Academy when they lived in Hyde Park, at least on the grade 7 through 12 level, no, they sent their kids to the lab school. And when they went to Washington, D.C., they didn't send their kids to the public schools that everybody glorifies, who's the
I'm sorry,
Democratic
Jeff,
Party.
what are you trying to tell me?
I'm trying to say, Meeks was pointing out, choice is the way to get quality education in the inner city.
It's okay. So Meeks may be the perfect appointment for that job. I'm not arguing with you. That's your opinion. That's wonderful. I share the opinion that that James Meeks has had experience in education, but I don't think that's what we were talking about, is it?
No, it was, because you were saying this is like a patronage appointment when Meeks gets appointed, and all I'm saying, Meeks ain't no patronage appointment. Do you agree now?
Okay. No, I don't agree.
All right.
now.
Well, let's go on. Show us about Walter Jacobson, okay?
Well, I don't need you to talk about me, but
No,
if you're gonna
I mean
talk
about your
politics,
views.
then I got to have my say too, right?
Well, okay, so you're saying that, well, back to Rauner and what you think of Rauner. You were saying that he has the potential to be a very good governor.
because he knows finances, and because, as he says, he's been very successful in business, and because he is single-minded and very tough. He may be very good. He has many rocks to jump over, much sand to walk through. He spent a year, 2 years in fact, Jeff, he spent that time calling the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate of the Illinois General Assembly corrupt and patronage-driven, and he was going to shake things up. Now he's there, and he has to deal with the Speaker of the House, Mike Madigan, and the President of the Senate, John Cullerton, and they're on edge about him. They're not going to give him the cooperation he needs to fill a $2 billion hole in the budget that's going to come as a result of the tax increase being rolled back. Bruce Rauner, Jeff, has to learn, in my humble, I hope, opinion, Bruce Rauner has to learn how to deal in the political game. He has not had that experience. A little bit like Barack Obama, who went to Washington and is having serious problems right now because, to a large extent, in my opinion, he surrounded himself by Chicago mafia politicians. I don't mean mafia in the bad sense, but Chicago politicians inexperienced in the ways of congressional politics. Bruce Rauner doesn't know how to deal. Wait, let me just finish this sentence. Bruce Rauner doesn't know, because he hasn't had the experience, how to deal with the politicians in the General Assembly with whom he must deal, because they have the power simply to override every one of his vetoes. Okay,
but who surrounded who with Chicago mafia politicians?
Who surrounded me?
No, I was trying to interrupt what you just said in the last minute. You said something about somebody being surrounded by Chicago mafia politicians. Who are you talking about?
When Barack Obama went to Washington, he collected and brought with him some of the major political players in Chicago, like David Axelrod and Rahm Emanuel and Bill Daley. And these people didn't have the Washington clout and Washington experience to keep Barack Obama out of the trouble he's in. Not entirely.
Wait a second. Rahm Emanuel didn't? This guy is the guy who elected that brought a Democratic majority in 2000, is it 6 or 8? To the Congress. Rahm Emanuel did. Why wouldn't Rahm know about this stuff?
Well, I don't know how much specifically he knew or knows, but I know that he has not, and the others have not done or did not do enough for Barack Obama to keep him out of the trouble he's in. And they should have been more involved in Washington before Barack brought them in. Barack went in with a lot of self-confidence, an articulate spokesman, a really bright,
So you're trying to draw the analogy as to what Obama did wrong and not having as many of the locals involved, and you might be saying that Bruce Rauner needs to have more of the locals in Springfield involved. Is that your point?
Right. Bruce Rauner has to learn, as I said a few minutes ago, how to deal with the politics of the General Assembly. He's not accustomed to letting people tell him what to do because he's been, he says he has $500 million. He earns $50 million or makes $50 million a year. He's used to being the boss, and he's not going to be the boss in Springfield, except, can I say one more thing?
Yes, sir.
Except this, and this is important. Bruce Rauner has $20 million left over from his campaign. Contributions from himself, $10 million, and about $8 million from his good friend Griffin, who's the richest man in Illinois.
Not left over.
I'm going to make,
you might be talking about somebody different, but they've just announced they have a $20 million infusion of money to deal with trying to influence legislators.
Okay.
Is that what you're talking to? Is that what you're referring to?
750 more from the Hollywood crowd. No, that's
750.
Rahm. That's Rahm. Rahm got that from the Hollywood crowd. Bruce has 20, as you say, $1 million to
try to influence the legislators.
Yeah, that's right. And
the people. He may use that for ads to go over the heads of those folks to put pressure on Speaker Mike, to put pressure on Senate President Cullerton. So he may try to do what people say Reagan did, as you recall. He went over the heads of Congress. He went right to the people, and they were supposed to pressure Congress, right?
Right. And that's what
Might that work?
And that's what I was saying. Bruce Bruce Rauner will be in trouble if he doesn't learn how to deal with the members of the General Assembly, except that he has the $20 million to use, as you've just suggested, for robocalls and for buying TV ads in case one of his projects gets difficulty in the General Assembly. So he's going to be different in that regard.
Well, and one other, okay, I'll try to keep this brief because it really is about your views, but I want to throw this out and get your response.
Okay.
He said a lot during the campaign, despite what he said about corruption and so forth in Springfield, the leaders and so forth. He said he wants to spend time talking to each legislator. Sure. He realizes that's how you get votes done.
Right.
So he understands what you said.
Right.
Number two, people said he's been out there influencing people to get business around the country in the private sector. He knows a lot of those things was union business, was government pension business. You had to get a group of people behind you, so he understands even that's a political process. And the last thing, Walter, have you looked at the appointments that were announced in the last few days? The appointments of Rauner to his who's going to be his administrative team, who's in a sense going to be running his government. Have you looked at those people?
Well, what I've noticed is that of the 38 or so appointments he's made, 16 are press people, public relations people to work in his communications area, and lawyers to give him advice on what to do. And I don't know, maybe that's very important to do. I think that, and I think this whole big fuss of a special election that Bruce and Pat Quinn have been fighting about to replace Judy Bart Topinka for 2 years or 4 years is just a distraction and a waste of time. $50,000 for a special session of the Illinois General Assembly to decide to hold an election in 2 years, and Bruce Rauner doesn't want one in 2 years. He wants his appointment to be comptroller to serve for 4 years. Who cares, okay, Jeff? Come on.
No, that's not
many more important issues.
But look, point the finger of blame. Walter, are you a liberal?
It depends on the issue. Sometimes I'm conservative, sometimes I'm liberal.
Have you ever voted for a Republican?
You know what? I don't like to say who I voted for, but I will tell you a secret. There have been many times when I just have not voted because I don't want to have my mind set with one party or another, and I don't want to be connected in anybody's view as being member of one party.
Don't you think
I'm embarrassed for not voting, but I have a good reason for not voting sometimes.
And your good reason is what?
Well, my good reason for not voting, I just told you. I don't want to be seen as somebody with a party connection or with a strong opinion in favor or against one party, because my whole life has been to try to walk down the middle and listen to both sides.
But in the general election, they would never know who you voted for. They would only know if you took a Republican or Democratic primary ballot.
Of course.
So if you vote in the general election, they won't know who you vote for.
But you just asked me how I voted, so I'm answering your question.
But you don't think people perceive you as a Democrat and a liberal?
They probably perceive me not as a Democrat or a Republican, but as more left of center than right of center, because largely most of the people in the world of journalism have been through a lot of colleges and graduate schools and tend to be a little bit left of center. I mean, certainly
some would say a lot left of center. Don't you think they're pretty left of center?
In my opinion, some of us are much. I'm not one of them, but some of us in the business are too much left of center. And I am, to tell you honestly, Jeff, absolutely disgusted with what's going on cable television. I mean, I am a cable television watcher. I'm like you, a political junkie. And when I turn on the news on cable television, I'm hoping to get an objective analysis of the major stories of the world, like the killings in France. And what I'm getting on Fox is all very extreme right-wing between Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly. And what I'm now getting on MSNBC is very strong, at least as strong on the other side, from Rachel Maddow and Ed Smith and Lawrence O'Brien. Enough of that. If they want to give their opinions, fine. But the station declare that their opinions. Don't lead us to believe that these are news broadcasters. They're opinion givers. When I gave my opinion and my perspective all those years on television, I am identified, always on the bottom of the screen, Walter Jacobson's perspective.
Well, let me ask you.
Yes.
Have you ever heard of a program called Special Report on the Fox News Channel? It's a daily program. It's called Special Report, but it's a daily news program on the Fox News Channel.
Yeah, isn't that Bear?
Brett Baer.
Brett Baer.
Do you watch that program?
Yeah, I try to watch them all.
Okay, all I'm saying, let me just finish. You said, just give me 30 seconds here. It's not perfectly balanced. It's certainly right of center, but for the first 40 minutes, you don't have the Sean Hannity, Rachel Maddow kind of stuff. You have Brett Baer, and before him, it was Britt Hume. Okay, so if Brett Baer is
And I
good,
like Van Susteren. She's good too.
but if Brett Baer gives you 40 minutes of news, which I think he does, somewhat right of center and the people reporting, but he doesn't just argue. He says, here's the news, we go out to so-and-so. He does what you did. You were an anchor, and the last 20 minutes of that show, since you watch it, you know, it's a somewhat balanced discussion, commentary, and they separate it like yours was. They could call it perspective. Now, they have 3 people and usually 2 conservative, 1 liberal. I would prefer 2 and 2. You probably would too. Shouldn't you be highlighting what Brett Baer is doing on Special Report?
Well, okay. Let's look into the camera and tell the audience, as I said to you, I think Brett Baer is one of the best, and he's very good. Okay. And his show is more even. Greta Van Susteren's show on Fox News is more even-handed than the others.
Does MSNBC have anything to match what Brett Baer does?
Well, now you're catching me for a name. I
don't think they do. I'm not trying to. It's not gotcha.
Lawrence
No,
O'Brien.
but it's not. They don't do. They do what Hannity does.
Oh, yes. You know what? I'll tell you.
Okay.
Anderson Cooper's show does more hard news and less opinion until he gets into his silly commentary at the end. But that's good. I watch, and you know what? I'll tell you another one. Okay. How about Wolf Blitzer?
But those are CNN. I asked you, sir. I asked you about MSNBC. Anybody who complains about the Fox News Channel, if they're fair, should complain about MSNBC.
I think that's true. That's right. That's fair.
All right. Look, we only have a minute or 2 left.
Oh, we didn't get to talk about any local politics.
Do it real quick. Give us your impressions of Richard M. Daley, Richard J. Daley. You knew these guys
in 30 seconds.
I'm sorry, that's all we got.
Okay.
How does
one couple of words
compare with the other?
Yeah. Couple of words.
Yeah.
Richard J. Daley, the father, was very much involved and driven by political considerations. Don't forget, he was chairman of the Democratic Central Committee. Rich M. Daley, Richard Michael Daley, the son, has not been as interested in politics as his father. He, of course, didn't want to and never has been chairman of the Democratic Party, and he doesn't play politics the way his dad did. Which isn't to say that Richard M. didn't do as good a job as his dad. He may have done a better one, because you need strong politics. But Richard M., you asked for a difference? Richard M., the son, is just not as politically motivated as his dad was.
Did his dad, Richard J. Daley, say good politics is good government and good government is good politics?
Yes, he did say that.
Did Richard M. say that?
When he was criticized that the person, whether it's the media or other politicians, criticize him, he'd say, well, what trees do you plant? Good question.
Meaning,
if you're going to criticize, tell me what you
Richard J.
would do instead. Richard J. said that, right. And if you don't agree with me, remember he said, kiss my mistletoe.
Yeah, kiss my mistletoe. Did Richard M. Daley do a pretty good job from 1989 to 2011?
I think he did a pretty good job, yeah. What
about Mayor Rahm Emanuel? How's he done in his first term? He's almost completed it.
It's hard to answer these questions in just a couple of seconds, but on balance, I think Rahm Emanuel has done a very good job. He's a strong guy, but he's got a lot of problems, and he's just a little too, for my personal taste, arrogant and sure of himself, and he's going to pay a consequence for that in this election.